Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Richard Spenlove and my guest this week is best known perhaps for his role as Chief Inspector Conway in BBC television series The Bill. He is of course the actor Ben Roberts. Ben, tell me first of all, if you will, where and when you were born.
Well, I was born in 1950 in Bangor, North Wales, and I left there when I was 17. I'd already grown too big for that small town, so I moved to London then.
What did your father do?
He was an electrician.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I've got two sisters. One is 2 years older than me.
What have they made of their lives?
Well, my sister's a housewife. She married a railwayman, which I believe you used to be. And my younger sister, who's about 22 now, she works at a building society.
Where were you at school?
Friars Grammar School, Bangor, never forget it. A hideous experience from beginning to end. Came out with 3 O-levels, one of them woodwork, and got a job in the local hotel there, and that's when I started my varied career. Nobody else would have me, quite frankly. Apprenticeship didn't appeal, although I took one up later when I was much older. Yes, school wasn't something that appealed to me, really.
Were you ill-treated, do you think?
I think I ill-treated them, actually, and they responded in kind.
All right, you obviously thought about as much about school as I did mine. Talk to me about your early work.
Well, as I said, I started work at the local hotel, mainly because it was the only contact that I had, because during school holidays and what have you, summer holidays, I worked as a waiter, as most kids do, something like that. And I went to work full-time there, and the manager of that hotel was a mason in a lodge in London, and he had a word with the manager of the place where they have their dues, and I got transferred, as it were. And at the age of 17, I started working in London in Hammersmith, the old Clarendon restaurant, which is now being in the process of being demolished, which is quite sad, because I had some good times there. Some new development going up there now. So that's when I started working, and I became a manager at the age of 19. Left there and went to work for an infamous chain of steakhouses in London.
Don't say any more.
Left there and went back to the Clarendon, where I continued as a wine waiter and what have you. Got fed up with the unsociable hours and took a full-time government training course in instrument technology. Finally ended up working for the people who make beans in Harlesden as an instrument fitter, which was great fun, but I didn't like the way factory life is conducted, so I left and went to drama school.
Why did you go to drama school?
Pure coincidence. I was staying in a bed sit in Bayswater. That sounds like a cliche, doesn't it? But the landlord and lady were heavily into amateur dramatics, being ex-pros themselves. Well, not ex-pros, but sort of semi-retired pros. And I got conned into doing an amateur role, and I really enjoyed it. And other people thought I was quite good. I didn't. Well, I suppose I did. But they persuaded me that I was good enough to go to drama school. Hello, that's Henry. Come to join us.
Which drama school did you go to?
I went to the Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art in a rabbit hutch in Gloucester Road.
All right. Take us through a drama school course then, as briefly as you can.
From my standpoint, I was 25 when I started there, and was surrounded by people who were between the ages of 17 and 19. I'd had 2 careers, in inverted commas, before joining, and they were all out of college and school and stuff, so I wasn't very happy for the first few terms, because I was surrounded by these frivolous people who knew nothing about life, it seemed to me. And I didn't really get on. In fact, I got thrown out after my first term, but with a little gentle persuasion on the principal, I persuaded him to let me stay on, and things got better after that. At the beginning, it was very much like going back to school, which was hideous. But I sort of learned the ropes. My character started changing, of course, because I was now doing something that I knew nothing about, and I was taking it the wrong way at first. After the first year, I really began to enjoy it, and I flourished, I suppose, was the word.
Did you do things like pretending to be trees?
Yes. Oh, God. There was one famous incident. There was a director there called Hugh Morrison, who was a fantastic bloke and totally eccentric. And one of his exercises was we used to sit on the floor, proper psychedelic 70s style, and sit on the floor cross-legged and hum until we were calm and everything. And then he'd say, now I want you all to pretend to be a block of ice. And after a few minutes, he'd click his fingers and say, now melt. Which is totally incomprehensible to me. I haven't a clue, and it's got nothing to do with acting as far as I'm concerned. But things like that used to go on, and used to pretend to be in a lifeboat out at sea and having been adrift for a fortnight, and you sort of pretend what your attitudes are going to be towards each other and stuff like that. It's quite bizarre. I'm not convinced that it's very valuable, but it's standard procedure, apparently.
When you say it's standard procedure, I mean, you're not the only one who has told me that they're not convinced by all this. Why do you think it becomes standard procedure? Who invents this?
Well, there's no doubt that, I mean, some elements of work with improvisation is very valuable. And Stanislavski, for instance, advocated that this is good to extend your mind and everything else. It's not a question of whether or not improvisation is valuable. It's a question of whether or not the improvisation you're doing at the time is valuable. And I suspect that the stuff we were doing wasn't particularly good quality, and it wasn't being conducted properly. The American theatre uses it a lot, but they work in an entirely different way on a production because they start on an improvisatory level and then build it into whatever script you've got. In England, the style is quite the opposite. I mean, the script is sacrosanct, and you start from the script. So it's like we're doing something the Yanks are very good at, but it's sort of not appropriate to our style of work. So that's why I think there's doubts about whether it's valid or not.
The day of graduation came.
It came a term early. I'd had enough, basically, because I'd been in finals for a couple of terms, because I jumped a class earlier on. So I did a term at that stage, a term more in finals than I should have been at. Then there was the whole summer holidays and go back for another term of finals, so I thought, I could be spending this time finding a job. So I left and found a job.
Where did you get your first job?
Pitlochry Festival Theatre in Perthshire. That's where I met my wife, Helen. It was idyllic. I didn't do much acting. It was mainly humping sets about and stuff like that, general skivvying. But I got my ticket, my equity card, and met my wife. So it was a very fortuitous first job, really.
And you say you didn't act then?
Bits and bobs, as an acting, what they call an acting ASM, which you do all the dirty work, and if there's a butler with no lines, then you do it.
Do you, in those circumstances, live in a garret and starve?
Yes, very much so, at the time. As a matter of fact, we lived in a caravan in Pitlochry. We arrived early March, and it was like 6 below when I got off the train. So the caravan was a bit, it's like the modern equivalent of a garret, I suppose. Yes.
How long did you stay up there?
About 8 months. That was the tour. Well, there was a tour after. There was like 7 months at that theatre. Well, we did 7 different plays in repertoire, a different one every night, or 6 nights and a different one on Saturday afternoon. So we were doing 7 plays in a week. Gradually rehearsing them and getting one on, then adding one, and in the end we were doing 7 a week. That's 7 set changes a week. And then we took it on tour to Aberdeen and Inverness and the Highlands and Islands tour, Stirling, Dundee, places like that. And I finished when we were in Inverness.
Had you, for want of a better phrase, been promoted during that time to taking bigger roles or not?
Well, what happened was that I met a man called Chris Honer, who used to run the Playhouse at Derby. And as I live in Nottingham, it was very convenient. And I did an audition for him and got a job. It's fairly smallish parts. And he obviously recognised my potential, and I did 22 plays there over 5 years. And some of the best work I've ever done, and the biggest roles certainly I've ever done. He's now at Manchester Library Theatre, but he was the boss of my apprenticeship, if you like. He taught me more than any drama school ever did.
What roles in particular did you play at Derby?
The memorable ones are Arturo Ui in the play of that title, The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which is he's the sort of American gangster equivalent of Adolf Hitler. It's a Brecht play about the rise of the Third Reich. It's set in like Chicago gangster style. That was fantastic. I mean, it's such a huge role and such a powerful play that I really enjoyed that. I did Azdak in Caucasian Chalk Circle there, which is another Brecht. We did Waiting for Godot in the Studio, in which I played Estragon, which was another fabulous part to do. Oh, Bottom in The Dream. Virtually all the Alan Bleasdale and Willie Russell comedies, which is a riot, you know. A few Akeborns. Mainly in lead roles, which is great. Then Leicester Haymarket saw me there, and I did half a dozen there in decent roles, comedy roles.
Had Leicester got their own rep then?
Yes, that's at the Haymarket, the new theatre. That was under Michael Meacham. It's all changed now, of course. But I was back there fairly recently. I did a new play called The Traveller with David Threlfall. You know, he played Smike in the Dickens at the Shakes. And that transferred to London, and that's how I got the bill, really, because I got spotted there.
Before we come to the bill, in more general terms, had you done television work before that?
Not a lot of television work, but when Central came to Nottingham, I got quite lucky, because for small parts, you know, because they wanted somebody close and that could start tomorrow, and I cleaned up on a few things, you know, I did half a dozen little jobs for them. And then a good part in that Tales of Sherwood Forest. That was a dire flop, but it was great fun to work on. And it got me, you know, into a position where I was doing proper television rather than bits and bobs. So, no, I hadn't done a great deal of television, not before the bill, no.
How did you get into the bill?
Well, I got a phone call, as usual, from the agent. Would I like to see somebody? So I went down for an interview, not thinking, you know, that I'd get it, because, you know, get a major role on a series like that is quite something to get. I had an interview. They called me back with the producers. I went back 2 days later to see the executive producer. I went down 2 days after that to start work, which is fantastic. I couldn't believe it.
So was the bill the point of your career when you began to be known?
Yes, definitely. In a national sense, international sense now. Yes, I mean, I was fairly well known locally because of having done so much local theatre work, you know, quite often in the local papers. So I used to get spotted by theatre people who went to the theatre, and the locals with my bits and bobs, but on a national scale nobody would notice the stuff I did before the bill. But now, I can't walk down the street now. Especially on my new bicycle, I get whistled at quite a lot.
Do you enjoy that?
Yes, I do. Of course, it's quite flattering. It can be a bit much. I mean, I can't go into town on a Saturday night for a drink or anything like that. It gets a bit heavy. When the Nottingham lads have had a drink, you know, they get a bit rowdy.
Oh, it's just the same as it used to be then.
It hasn't changed a bit. They don't wear their mining boots in town anymore, that's all.
Do they still wear velvet collars? And draped jackets?
One or two. Yeah, there is a pub in town. The name escapes me now, but it is a rock and roll pub. It's all drapes and drain pipes. You know.
The Peach Tree?
Could be.
Or is it by any chance the Cocked Hat at Broxtowe?
I don't go anywhere near Broxtowe. Dangerous territory.
I don't know, Woodfield Road used to be nice, but we digress. Were you in the bill before the format changed?
No, there were 3 50-minute, 14-part series before the half-hour format came in. And now that's 104 episodes a year instead of 15, you know. And by its very nature, it has to be made. It's not a soap, let me tell you, but it has the same format as a soap. So you've got to make 2 a week to keep up with what you're putting out. So it has to be made in much the same way as a soap is made. Except the program is so complicated with stunts and cars blowing up and this, that and the other that you can't, it's not as simple as a soap to make. So the schedule is manic, it's furious to get the stuff done, you know. So we get a script on a Friday, get it learnt over the weekend, and we're straight in on the Monday morning. No rehearsal, nothing. Haven't even met the guest artists who are playing with you, you know. And it's an adrenaline situation from the word go on Monday morning, and it's very exciting way to work. And I think that is the key to why it's such a good program. If we had rehearsals and sort of gently worked through it, it would lack the energy that it's got, you know. So it's hard work because of that, but I think that's the saviour of it. That's why it's good.
Having said that you're given a script on Friday nights, take us through then a week of your work.
Right. Monday morning, 7:30, makeup. After that, 8:30, you could be in snow, rain, anything. You're bussed out to wherever you're working. I'm very lucky because at my rank, I spend a lot of time in the station, so I'm quite lucky. But some of these constables, because they spend most of their time on the street. So they're out in pouring rain, no shelter, nothing, no tea, nothing, and straight into it. And the schedule is very tight. You've got to complete a scene by 10 o'clock so that you can get on to the next, because if you get behind, and continuity of weather when you're outside and stuff like that. So it has to be done. And there's no corner cutting or anything like that. If it's wrong, it gets done again. But the pressure increases. Every time it goes wrong, the pressure increases. And it goes on like that until lunchtime. Then you get on a bus and have a bowl of stew in the pouring rain or something, and straight back into it. And at 6 o'clock, you just flop back into that bus, get back to the station or the studio, but it's a station really, and generally flop onto the floor, recover panting, go down the pub for a couple of pints, and go home to learn tomorrow's stuff. And so it goes on. Right through till Friday. At 6 o'clock on Friday, everybody has had it. I mean, they've just had it. And that's when the producer pulls you into her office and opens bottles of wine everywhere, so, you know, to say thank you for a good week. And it's like that week in, week out, week in, week out. I don't know if you know, but we've just moved to a new studio, and we had a 7-week break. Now that's 14 episodes we had to catch up on. So for 20 weeks, to make sure we had enough episodes and, you know, nothing went wrong, we made 3 a week. So you can imagine what it was like. I mean, the process I've just described is just making 1. And doing 3, oh, dreadful.
How do you learn your lines?
At first, it was quite hard because I didn't know who the character was. I was just dumped with the script and said, learn that and be him. You know, I had no history of him or anything. So it was quite hard at first because you weren't just learning lines. You were trying to make something of the character. Now it's a lot easier because I know who he is. And the writers are now more familiar with me, so they know how to write for me better. And the words now more or less spring there automatically. It's like I'd normally speak, you know, in the character. So it's not too difficult unless you've got a great deal to learn or a lot of official jargon. That's the hard stuff to learn. But you just sit down, concentrate, and just cram it in, you know.
Do you get any help at home?
No, on the contrary, screaming kids everywhere and busy wives and having to get tea ready for them when I'm off and all that sort of thing.
Do I take it your wife was in the business?
Yeah, she still is. She was an actress. I said I met her up at Pitlochry as she was there as an actress. Now she works for Central Television in Nottingham as a project coordinator. She makes the CSAs, the community service announcements, virtually single-handed. She writes them and directs them and edits them and everything. So she's got her own little kingdom there, or queendom.
Obviously, in a series like The Bill, it's got to appear to be fairly authentic. How do you get this authenticity?
Well, we've got two ex-superintendents on permanent staff, Wilf and Brian, and they keep a very close weather eye on the scripts and the way we do things, the way our attitude, you know, in the programme. And they're constantly giving us advice where we go wrong. And also in personal life, very handy sometimes. If you get into a spot of bother, they can put you straight about how to go on, you know. I mean, as you know, recently I lost my licence, and Wilf and Brian were very helpful in telling me how I should go on with that. I didn't get away with it, unfortunately. But yes, they're very good. They're always there, on hand, when you want them. If there's any tiniest point that you're doubtful about, they're in there straight away, putting you right.
So often when we see these police series now, they seem to go over the top in some cases in respect of the way they deal with the public. I mean, do you get away with that with your police advisors, or indeed do you think that you do that?
Well, while being as realistic as we can be, because the bill is famous for being realistic and giving the impression of reality. It's not quite the case, though, because we do pull back a bit. We'd have an awful lot of trouble from the Metropolitan Police and from the public too, I'd imagine, if we got any tougher with it. I mean, it's pretty tough, but I think it stops slightly short of reality because it's a lot rougher than we make it out to be on the streets. Also, we have the IBA to consider. If we showed things too graphically, because the show's on at 8 o'clock, before the 9 o'clock adult threshold, we have to be careful what we show, or we wouldn't be allowed to show it. One memorable occasion is the episode where Ramsey got shot, dead, outside the bank. Now, we had to recut that twice to satisfy the IBA because it was too real. And it really was. I mean, I saw the original version, and I was on the edge of my seat because it was so real. And these gunmen in the bank, you know, they were frightening. And with kids watching, a lot of kids watching, we weren't allowed to show that, so we had to redo it to tone it down a bit, which was a shame because it was really good after 9 o'clock drama, but we couldn't show it before 9 o'clock.
It's an interesting theory, though. Do we pull back for the wrong reasons? I mean, if gunmen go into a bank to rob it and people are shot and injured, then it is, by definition, horrifying. Did we ought to be pulling back from showing the truth as it really is?
Personally, I think we shouldn't pull back, but the rules are the rules. You know, the IBA just won't let you, and it's very much a matter of opinion. It's because there are kids watching. If it went out after 9 o'clock, we would have shown it the way it was made, which would be fine. But it's very much a children's program as well, as well as an adults program. So personally, I don't think we should pull back. But then personally, I think this program should be on after 9 o'clock.
To take personally a step further, has your involvement with this series persuaded you to form any differing opinions of the officers of the law than you had before?
I have a lot more respect for the police since I've been on this program because I've learned a lot about the police. Even though I got nicked last week, I mean, that doesn't really matter. I've got a lot more respect because I understand and appreciate more now because of what I know, what they're up against. And you can understand sometimes if you know if you think policemen have a bad attitude sometimes, then now I understand why they appear to have a bad attitude sometimes.
Where is the bill going from here?
Well, there are no plans to scrap it or anything. We've just moved to a new place which costs about £2 million, so they're not about to junk that. But we're looking certainly at, I would think, at another couple of years. There's possibility now, rumour going around, that we're selling it to America, which will be a first for a British police series of this kind. It's already going out in Australia and New Zealand with great success, and various other countries, Abu Dhabi and places like that. You know, I'd love to see a version that was dubbed into Japanese or something. But it's going from strength to strength. You know, it's staying up there in the figures, and it's full steam ahead.
If it's going on like this and you see it steaming ahead in this fashion, when you're talking to the producer again, will you tell them that you met a pompous little fat man in Nottingham who wouldn't mind if they wrote to him?
I shall personally suggest you for a role. There you go.
Where do you see your future after the bill?
It's a difficult one, that, because I've got so used to television now. It might be a difficult step to go back to the theatre, not just in terms of style of work, but financially, because it's a well-known fact there's not a lot of dosh in the theatre anymore. My first love is always theatre, I have to say that, and I'd dearly love to go back, but it depends under what circumstances. I think television is where I'm going personally in the future. The future of television is uncertain, so I can't really say whether or not I'm going to stay with it, because it might decline. But straight away after the bill, I think I'd like to do a play again, just to get my sea legs or stage legs back, as it were.
Have you ever made a film?
No, I've done bits and bobs of television film, but not feature film, no. I'd love to.
To bring the programme to what is almost always its natural conclusion, put yourself in the position, if you will, of having been stripped of all memories you have, bar one. Which would be the one that you would keep above all others?
Oh dear. Well, I think without question the most fabulous thing that's ever happened to me that I never want to forget is the birth of my son. It was the most extraordinary experience and changed my attitude towards life completely. So I think the first year of my son's life